The next topic, if you're just joining us, I introduced it earlier, but I'm going to repeat myself, and I have to be careful the language I use here because I want to be accurate, and I have a panel of experts here who are going to explain it here. But we have 3 vaccines for the coronavirus: the Pfizer, the Moderna, and now the new Johnson & Johnson. Concerns have been raised about the latest entrant, and that would be the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, about its, again, I want to be careful, its lineage, I guess, or its the ability to trace it back to the use of fetal cell tissue. Now, in fact, Johnson & Johnson, it is derived from that. But again, I'm not the one to talk to. We have Dr. Bridge Bombay who's going to be speaking to that. Suffice it to say, some members of the Catholic Church, some bishops have cautioned their parishioners to be careful. They didn't say don't take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. They said that's an individual decision. But if you had a choice, perhaps you should go for the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine that are not derived from an abortion. Now, this is a really important moral issue to a lot of people, but we have a big conflict here between the safety of Americans and the safety of everyone, and then your religious beliefs. So we do have Dr. Bridge Bombay from Centric Health. He's with us. We also have District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer on. I want to welcome both of them to the Richard Bean Show. D.A. Zimmer and Dr. Bombay, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, they're both with me here. Okay, Dr. Bombay, if we could, we're going to start with you. Could you help us understand the difference between, I guess, the RNA and the DNA, the Johnson & Johnson-based vaccines? How do they differ? And walk us through kind of an A to Z on what that means and how the J&J vaccine was developed.
So it's very important to recognize the difference between the fetal cells and the lineage. The cells that are multiplying on their own are in the laboratory, and they're thousands of generations apart from the original fetus material. So there isn't any direct link to the fetal material. These are derivatives of the fetal material from 50-some years ago who are very prolific in reproduction. So it's their ability to reproduce that allows the vaccines to exploit that biologic opportunity. So going back to the messenger RNA vaccines, which are the Moderna and Pfizer, it's a very complicated and meticulous process. So typically they start with the spike protein, take the genetic material from that, and convert it into a duplicate DNA, which is the predecessor of messenger RNA. So the DNA that is injected into bacteria called E. coli that commonly causes UTI. So the E. coli reproduces at 20 minutes, every 20 minutes, and within 3 days you have trillions and trillions of copies of the DNA. That DNA is then filtered, and the strands of DNA are excised from St. Louis, Missouri. Then they're shipped to Andover, Massachusetts. Now the DNA in Massachusetts is converted into a messenger RNA using a broth. So there's a very large broth in which they put the duplicate DNA constructed in St. Louis and intermixed with enzymes and our genetic breaks, so the foundation called nucleotides. The enzyme converts the DNA into messenger RNA. That's cleaned, filtered, purified, decontaminated, and then packaged into nanoparticles of fat cells. because messenger RNA itself can be injected into the body because it'll degrade right away. So it needs the protection of a small lipid layer or fat layer, nanoparticles, that allows the messenger RNA to go into the cells in a body. So before it is packaged, it has to be tested for efficacy and has to be made sure there isn't any contamination. So it's a very elaborate and meticulous process, and it's amazingly successful. Now, it's very important to recognize for both Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, there isn't any fetal tissue involved. There isn't any lineage of the original cells involved. When the needle goes in somebody's arm, there isn't any material related to the fetal cell line.
No, no derivatives, nothing.
Nothing, zero. So
Okay.
it has nothing to do, there is no material. The only thing Pfizer and Moderna did was to check the efficacy of the vaccine outside the body. They used the cells from the lineage to see if the vaccine was efficient and efficacious outside the body. That was the only role in Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. So rest assured, there isn't any component of the fetal tissue, even 1,000 generations apart, that is injected into human body using the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. Now, J&J, there are three components to a vaccine formation. There is the development of the vaccine, then you have to make sure it's efficacious or confirmation, and third is the production. So J&J is a different technology that uses adenovirus, which is a common cold causing virus. They have changed the structure of the adenovirus so that it doesn't replicate. Once it's injected into the body, just a letter carrier, it delivers a DNA of the spike protein into the cells of the body, and the DNA then goes down the line, passes the information to messenger RNA, which creates the spike proteins, and the spike proteins then generate the immunologic response, that's the vaccine. In case of J&J, again, all they do is they take the adeno virus and use the cells for multiplication of the adenovirus. So there isn't any tissue per se that is going in there. They're using the prolific reproducing ability of the fetal cell lines or the lineage to multiply what we call viral vector vaccines. Virus is a vector that is carrying the nuclear material of the spike proteins as a vaccine into the body. So that whole process, even though J&J uses the technology for development, confirmation, and production, it isn't incorporating the lineage. It is just using that as a mechanism to develop the vaccine. So in both the cases, there isn't any tissue or biologic that's coming from the fetal cell line or the lineage that's going into a human body.
Okay. So let me make sure I have this straight. So even though there's no biologic, there's no fetal cell tissue in the J&J vaccine, it is clearly derived from it, and my understanding that is the basis of the church's objection, that the fact that it is a derivative, even it doesn't contain, as you say, the biologic itself, is reason enough to give a Catholic pause and to make an individual decision of whether they want to inject something into their body, even though it may save their life, if it was somehow derived or developed from the use of fetal cell tissue. I'm correct on that, right?
So the correct word would be using the technology to develop it and produce it.
Okay.
It's not derivative. So there is no derivative of the lineage that is in the vaccine. The tool, the proliferative powers of the fetal cell lines, thousands of generations apart, is the ability that's necessary for the virus to have an environment where it multiplies rapidly so that industrial level vaccine can be produced. But there isn't any material of the lineage that is involved in the vaccine itself.
Okay, and so in terms of the other two, Moderna and Pfizer, now those objections would not exist by the church because they didn't use a similar process, correct?
It's the concern is yes, your interpretation is correct, but the argument is made that even in those vaccines, that the lineage was used to confirm the efficacy of the vaccines. They were not completely kosher, so to speak, that the lineage was not used at all at any phase of the vaccine development.
Okay. Let's move to District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer. Ms. Zimmer, thank you so much for coming on the program. I appreciate it. Ms. Zimmer, you are obviously the district attorney here in Kern County, and you're known for your deep personal faith. Would you are you bothered by the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and what is your position on all three of the vaccines and whether people should take them?
Well, I looked at what the Vatican had to say, and their doctrinal office put out some information, and they said it was the Vatican stated that it was morally acceptable to receive the COVID-19 vaccines, and they said there was a duty not only to protect one's own health, but a duty to protect and pursue the common good. And they used language that is language. I'm a lawyer. And so they used language that was language used by the United States Supreme Court 100 years ago during a smallpox epidemic. In a case in Jacobson versus Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there was a smallpox epidemic in Massachusetts, and in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they required that every adult get a smallpox vaccine, and there were criminal consequences. Now, we haven't gone that far, but there were criminal consequences if people did not get that smallpox vaccine. You could be arrested and fined $5. So Mr. Jacobson did not want to get the vaccine. He was concerned personally about the ill effects upon his body. He was prosecuted, convicted, and the case went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court talked a lot about these kinds of issues and talked about the common good, just like the Vatican talked about, and the duty of one or the duty of the government to protect the safety of many, and you can't let the interests of many be subordinated to the wishes or conveniences of a few, and that vaccinations were the best way to suppress an epidemic that imperiled an entire population.
Boy,
yeah, so that was 100 years ago, a decision written in 1905 by the United States Supreme Court.
Did you just pick up on that on reading the Vatican statement and say that sounds familiar?
Yes, because we've been studying Jacobson versus Commonwealth as it relates to the Governor Newsom's, whether or not that's law, not law, whether, early on I had to research, okay, what happens during pandemics? What's the law? I mean, this has really been, but I feel personally, that everybody has the right to do what they want to do because the law is such that you don't have to. But I do believe that mass vaccination is for the common good. I volunteer at the mass vaccination COVID clinic at the fairgrounds because I think it's important to do my part for my community and my country. I personally feel that this vaccine is a miracle. I believe it will save lives, and we've all been touched by people that have perished from COVID, and I think it's really, really important. It's important for us to be able to continue to do essential services for the community as far as public safety. So we want to be well and do that. Now, my biology abilities, I'm a lawyer. I was a political science major. I'm not a doctor like Dr. Bombi, but I see there is a difference between Pfizer and Moderna, that they don't use these fetal cells only in the confirmation process, but J&J uses them in development, confirmation, and production. But the Vatican says that it is more morally acceptable to use them, and especially if there's not other alternatives available. So, I mean, generally speaking, I think that's what I feel about from the law, from one's duty for the common good, and as far as my personal and professional reasoning, that's the way I feel about this issue.
Right. And Ms. Zimmer, have you known people who you must have known people who have suffered from COVID, haven't you?
We've suffered in my office, despite the fact that we have taken extraordinary precautions, but we're running at about the county average of 1 in 10. And then I think that you and I know that we lost a family friend, a 29-year-old child this week, that my girlfriend's child from church perished, and with no comorbidity issues. Yeah. So people think, well, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm better off just to get the vaccine and get the disease and get through it rather than the vaccine. But you don't know, and you don't know if you give it to your parents, your grandparents, or somebody that does have issues. So for me, that is a major concern, and we're just so sad about the loss of our friend.
That's terrible. And let's be clear, you are not Catholic yourself, correct?
No, I'm a Baptist.
Okay, very good.
All
right.
But they're, they believe in these things just as well. The doctrine, I think, is pretty similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to Dr. Bombi. Dr. Bombi, if have you had Catholics come up to you, maybe people who are in line to get the shot, and say, "Will I be given a choice? Is there a way that if I wanted to avoid the J&J vaccine just because it would make me feel better it would just make me feel better, that I would be able to do that? Is that possible?"
So I have seen some people who have resistance based on the headline notion that this is fetal tissue driven. When you look at it from the prism of fetal tissue, it's a hard hill to climb for the faithful, because you really don't want to trade conscience for borrowed breaths. But when you look at the separation, which Vatican has said that this is a remote linkage, and they don't endorse the concept of abortion. What they're saying is, as D.A. Zimmer emphasized, is the general good concept that it's a moral imperative for us to accept the vaccine for our own health and for the health of vulnerables around us, because we don't want to be spreading the disease to them. We want to be a shield between the vulnerable and the infective. Yes, the faithful are somewhat reluctant, but when you lay the facts, most of the time the facts are sufficient to give them a belief or a confidence that they can go ahead and do it. But I don't know if there is a much choice. The detail we discussed today on the show in terms of the way the vaccines are made isn't a common knowledge. The connectivity to the possible fetal tissue is the concern, which is shared equally by the three vaccines. I'm not sure if Johnson & Johnson is considered more tarnished by the process. But it's important to emphasize there isn't any fetal tissue involved. There isn't any lineage cell line that's incorporated in the vaccine. What's important is all three vaccines save lives, prevent hospitalization, prevent death. And therein lies the moral emancipation of general good concept that Vatican emphasized. And D.A. Zimmer, she was eloquent, effective, and instructive in explaining those things through legal and Vatican's perspective.
Yeah. This is the first I've heard of this. Is there a reason that this hasn't come up, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention? I would think that something this important to the Catholic faith would have been these objections, or would have been raised earlier.
See, the Pope took the Pfizer vaccine, and he has been a proponent. He has been early adopter of the vaccines and has been pushing it. So yes, there has been some turbulence in some sections of Catholic belief system, but fortunately, it isn't the mainstream. And I would like to hear DA's comments on that. I have sporadic resistance or objection, but in general, people seem to recognize the general good concept.
Okay. All right, boy. That's important. Look, I want to thank both of you, Dr. Bridge Bombi and District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer, for coming on and explaining this to us. And also, it's a classic moral issue, but really, we're talking about a life and death issue here. So I want to thank both of you, Ms. Zimmer and Dr. Bombi. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.